Go now to meteorologist Ryan Hanrahan.
Joining us for the first time today.
Yes.
The coverage continues. Ryan, catch us up. What's Sandy doing now?
It does. Well, we are able to see the storm now, the hurricane on live 3D Doppler radar. The first bands of Hurricane Sandy are moving through, and we're getting a little bit of rain across portions of the state. It's not terribly heavy, but it is raining and the winds are picking up. But I want to show you the center of the hurricane. You can see it spiraling around here. This is an incredibly impressive storm, and it looks like it's going to track to the northwest and make landfall near Atlantic City later this afternoon or early this evening, and that will put us on the more dangerous right-hand side of the hurricane. And with that, we are expecting winds to ramp up all day long and storm surge to be very significant by later on today. So here's some of the wind gusts we're looking at currently. Winds generally gusting between 40 and 50 miles per hour along the shoreline. Hartford with a wind gust up near 50 miles per hour at the last hour. But notice what's going on down on Long Island. This is where our weather's coming from. West Hampton Beach gusting to 58, Islip gusting to 53. This is moving to the north, and you will notice the winds picking up over the next couple hours, and it looks like we'll really see the peak of the winds late this afternoon and into the early evening hours. Now, the big issue we've been talking about, and this is what we're most concerned with, is the potential for storm surge flooding. We've already seen flooding. In fact, I just got a text message and a picture from my brother down in Guilford. The town dock, the mooring restaurant, the Stone House, if you're familiar with the area down at the end of Whitfield Street, all flooded, all underwater. That hadn't happened in decades before until Irene. It happened then. It happened again this morning. Now we're getting a little bit of a break. The tide is going out. The water levels are dropping slowly, slowly receding. But don't be fooled. Though we may lose a foot or two to the tide levels where they are right now, as soon as the tide starts to rise again around 4, 5, 6 o'clock, we will see catastrophic storm surge developing from east to west across Long Island Sound. So again, if you're looking in East Haven or Branford or Old Saybrook and you're saying, oh, things are dropping a little bit, it's not rising, that's because the tide's going out. As soon as the tide starts to come in, the water levels will rise quickly. They'll rise dramatically, and we are looking at a life-threatening storm surge across Long Island Sound starting later this afternoon and this evening. In fact, here's a look at New Haven. The current level, 11.1 feet, slowly dropping, just shy of where we were during Irene, but we're forecasting a storm tide of more than 2 feet above what we had during Tropical Storm Irene. So here's what you need to know as we time out the storm. Winds will pick up throughout the afternoon across the state. We're looking at destructive wind gusts over 60 miles per hour later this afternoon all across Connecticut. Now, the water levels are slowly receding. They're dropping a little bit, but don't be fooled. A catastrophic storm surge will arrive later this afternoon and into this evening, and we're looking at a near-record storm surge across a large portion of Long Island Sound that, unfortunately, will destroy businesses, will destroy homes, and has the potential to kill you if you don't evacuate and you stay near an area where the water rises quickly, because it's going to start to really come up quickly as soon as the tide comes back in. Now, squalls and rain are moving across the state and will continue to do so through this afternoon. The rain will pick up, as will the winds. Now, late this afternoon and this evening, near hurricane conditions, winds will pick up to gusting at times near 80 miles per hour at the shoreline, less once you move away from the beaches. And again, the water will begin to rise very quickly, and squalls with torrential rain are expected. Some minor inland flooding is possible. Let's check in with meteorologist Darren Sweeney, who's standing by with more on the wind threat. Darren, the shoreline's getting the storm surge, but even inland, we'll see enough wind to take down some trees and power lines.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good Facebook questions.
Absolutely.
But I got to ask you, everyone's buzzing about this wind gust in New London. What happened?
Yeah, Groton New London Airport just gusted to 75 miles per hour. So that's a gust above hurricane strength in New London, which is far exceeded what we saw in Irene in that area. So southeastern Connecticut, and we also saw a wind gust on Great Gull Island, which is in Long Island Sound, not too far from Fisher's Island near the race, of 75 knots, which if I do my math right is about 85 miles per hour.
Wow.
So just offshore, these winds very impressive, and for sure southeastern Connecticut at this point is getting nailed. Oh, where's this picture?
That's Old Saybrook.
That's Old Saybrook.
Point. Yeah,
okay.
right near the dock and
So
dime.
Saybrook Point, we're looking at inundation that's almost similar to what we did during Irene. We're getting there. If you remember Jeff that morning standing there getting blown around. There's Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
He just flew by.
And you can see the waves are a lot bigger because the wind is a little bit stronger. So that's why we're concerned about coastal flooding exceeding what we saw during Irene. Irene.
And that's usually a calm river. Okay, let's get to our Facebook questions. This is accelerating like Gloria did. Looks like it will blow by us and spare us most of the damage. Hopefully, it will fall apart like Gloria did after landfall.
Well, and the big difference between Gloria and this storm is that when Gloria was hitting us, it moved from south to north. So as soon as the storm passed us, the winds shifted out of the west and blew all the water out of Long Island Sound. This is a different situation. It's making landfall to our south, so we have northeasterly winds now. After landfall, we'll have southeasterly winds. That's not helping us at all. So even once the storm makes landfall, we're still looking at onshore winds. That's why the coastal flooding will be worse once the storm actually moves inland. So unlike Gloria, we'll have much more impressive storm surge values. So that's a big concern.
Okay, next question. I've been watching all day, but haven't heard you talk about wind direction.
We
At
just
some point,
did. I knew
the
this
wind
question was
change
coming.
from northeast to southwest?
No, because the storm is not really hitting us dead on. It's passing to our south. So we will see the winds veer from northeast to southeast, but that is still dangerous. And one of the things we're concerned about, wow, look at those waves coming in. That's the Connecticut River.
I know.
Right
That
there.
is
That's
just
the Connecticut
unbelievable.
River.
I could sit and watch that.
So what we're talking about here is the winds, again, a little offshore now, still blowing out of the east, but they will shift to the southeast, which will blow them the water right on shore. So we will see not a total 180 in the wind direction shift, but more like sort of a 90-degree shift. So still an onshore wind and still causing problems.
Okay, next question. Can we expect some rivers to overflow?
Places like the Connecticut River, where you were looking, yes, tidal rivers will likely look at storm surge flooding. But if you're in one of those areas that's susceptible to flooding, you're in an evacuation zone, so you would know already. So if you're in Lyme and you live on the Connecticut River or Essex or Deep River, those areas are susceptible to flooding. Same on the Housatonic River, the Saugatuck River in Westport. All those places that are in low-lying areas have all been evacuated, or at least the town officials have asked them to evacuate.
Okay, and next question. Will there be, this is a big one, will there be any tornadoes with Sandy? A lot of people are really worried about that.
Unlikely, but it's a non-zero chance. So a very low probability of a tornado, but we can't totally rule it out. But I'm not, at this point, I'm not worried about it. We're watching radar closely, but I haven't seen anything that gives us a little bit of pause. Brooke, do we have a little extra time? Can we go to the weather maps? Is that okay with us? Yeah, let's go to the weather maps. We can throw up tracker. I can show you. I wanted to show you this, Lisa, because this is sort of important. This is when low tide is occurring. So the tide's been going out all day, but this is low tide. So low tide in New London is at 4 o'clock. So it's just past 4 minutes ago. So we're going to be looking at the tides beginning to increase. So even though we've seen the water levels recede, soon the water will begin rising again in Stonington and New London. By Old Saybrook, it's at 5 o'clock. That's when low tide is. So after 5, the tide will be coming back up. And then 6 o'clock, that holds for East Haven, New Haven, Milford, Bridgeport, all the way down to Westport and low tide is all around 6 o'clock. So once we get past that level. Now, a bit of good news here, Lisa. We have seen the Weather Service drop the storm surge forecast just a little bit. So in New Haven, we have a predicted storm surge, a total tide of 12 feet. Which would still be above Irene. So for people in East Haven that flooded during Irene, you'll likely flood again. But this is a little bit lower than it was a few hours ago. So that's a little bit better news. In Stamford, though, not so. They've kept the forecast the same, which would be a record-breaking flood, which would exceed the hurricane of 1938 there in Stamford. So some areas will look at record flooding. And the other thing to keep in mind as well, just because you have a tide at a certain level, if you have bigger waves on top of it, that tide becomes more destructive. So with the wind stronger and the higher waves, like Jeff was mentioning in Old Saybrook, that will do more damage with a similar level. I'm
hearing lower winds, and I'm hearing it's coming in fast. Is that good for us, the combination of those things? Is there any?
Yes, I think we moved the timing up just enough that we may be a little bit lucky. So instead of looking at a 38 kind of surge, we may be a little below that. But, I mean, we are splitting hairs here. We need to prepare for the worst case scenario. There's some indications we may see a little bit less than that, but I wouldn't count on it. There's still a very high probability that we see a catastrophic storm surge event. If we thought Irene was bad, every indication is this will be worse than Irene. And you can see there in Old Saybrook, a lot of the restaurants, we saw a picture earlier from Guilford of the mooring and the Stone House there, flooded from this morning's high tide, and they just rebuilt. They just reopened not too long ago, and they already had water into their restaurants earlier today, and that scene's being repeated across the Long Island
And right
Sound.
there, Dock and Dine too. People sending me pictures.
Yeah,
okay. Final question. Are we still getting the worst side of the storm? I think I'm going to answer this one. Yes. Isn't the right side always the worst?
Yes, we are. The right side is the worst. The left side, D.C., Delaware, they'll get about a foot of rain. We will get all the wind, and we will get all the storm surge.
All right. Great answers, Ryan. Thank you. All right, Keisha and Jerry, back to you guys.
Lisa and Ryan, thank you.
Well, guys, we're here at the South Benson Marina. Before, when I was here live, I told you that it was windy, it was gusty, and now you can add wet weather to that. I also want to show you these waves right behind me. They are crashing along the shore here. Now, we were told that the waves were as high as 5 feet earlier this morning, but that's not what we've seen. We've just seen them coming in with more and more frequency, and in a way that is sort of a good thing. Weather has continued to deteriorate because it is stopping people from coming here to the beach, which is something that police say they are very relieved about. Now, earlier I had told you that some 7 streets here in Fairfield has flooded. I spoke with police. They told me that. But they are telling me that some people have refused to leave even though they're in those areas that are under a mandatory evacuation. Police are right now sending some of their first responders to Fairfield Beach Road to rescue people from their homes as these conditions here continue to deteriorate. Live in Fairfield, Stefania Jimenez, NBC Connecticut News. Back to you.
All right, Brad Field is here to tell us what they're seeing. Well, Jerry and Keisha, we're seeing hurricane-force winds in parts of Connecticut, specifically southeastern sections of Connecticut, and we're showing you live pictures from New London. And that poor American flag has seen better days. It's been ripped to shreds here with hurricane-force winds. We had a 75-mile-per-hour wind gust at the Groton New London Airport, and one tick better than that at Ledge Light. We had a wind gust of 76 miles per hour. Right now in Groton, it is raining. It is 65 degrees. As I said, that gust is 75 and 45% of the area without power at the current time.
Jeff Stecker is standing by live right now. I believe he's at Saybrook Point. Jeff, take it away.
I'm not sure what you actually said to me. It's getting so noisy, it's getting hard to hear. The first thing I want to show you is what the water looks like now. This is the seawall, and the waves are just crashing right over top of it. At this point, it appears that sea level is the same as the seawall here in Old Saybrook. This parking lot here at Saybrook Point has completely flooded over now, and small waves are actually forming in this parking lot. Dave, just look at the trees right over there. You can see how much the winds have really picked up, and the mist off of the water here is just intense. Actually, let's go back to the water, Dave. I want to remind everyone where we are. We're near the mouth of the Connecticut River, but folks, this is the Connecticut River, and look at that water just churning up. Now, to show you the kind of damage we are starting to see, this just happened about maybe 10 minutes ago. This is what we're going to be looking at. This is a pretty big tree right here on the property, and it came down and it made a nice loud noise. That is a giant tree there. We're expecting to see an awful lot more of this. And again, if we can go back to the parking lot here, this flooding is happening in lots of side streets around Old Saybrook. And this is the kind of thing that they were concerned about. And this is why they wanted people to evacuate. Right now, a lot of these streets are flooded over just like this, and you should not be driving a car through this. When we talked to the chief of police down here, he said, that's one of the things he was worried about, people who try to evacuate when it's too late, and then they try to drive through water like this, and it's perfectly unsafe. Let's go one more time back out to the water, Dave, if we can. And that just that shows you what we're looking at right now. And remember, as Ryan and Brett and our other meteorologists were saying, we should be experiencing low tide here in Old Saybrook at about this hour. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens as the tide comes up and the storm gets a lot worse. That's the latest here in Old Saybrook. For now, let's send it back to you guys in the studio.
Jeff, can you hear me? Can you hear me right now?
I can hear you. Yes, yeah, I can hear you, Keish.
Jeff, what was the approximate timeline that's passed since the last time that we saw you, when you said it in maybe about a half hour, the conditions had gotten worse, to now? What is the progression of the storm where you are?
Okay, I think I heard what you're asking me here. Dave, come on down with me. It's so loud I have to sort of stand next to my photographer here. All right, if you look at the gate there, the fence there, when we got here maybe about an hour and a half ago at our first live shot, the water was below that, and some of the waves were starting to crash over it, but the parking lot was completely dry. Oh boy, this is a nice plastic seafoam in the face. What you can't see right now is I'm holding my photographer's back, and I'm holding us up right now so we don't tip over. The parking lot now is fully flooded over, and this was dry about maybe 45 minutes to an hour ago. So the water is coming up at a relatively decent clip, and so this surge is moving in, and it's pretty strong. Keisha?
Hey, Jeff, did you even hear that tree come down? Were you aware that the tree was coming down?
I didn't realize what was happening. I was actually in the live truck, and my photographer, Dave, was out here working on our wiring here, and all of a sudden I just heard boom, and there it was. I look out the truck, and there's the tree sitting right there.
All right, we got to be aware of our surroundings. Jeff Stecker in Old Saybrook. You and Dave Mulligan, be safe. Thank you.
Will do.
And just to give you some...
In the meantime, let's go over to Ryan.
Yeah, Jerry and Keisha, the big concern now as we move forward is storm surge flooding. We are looking at water levels on the Sound now through the entire Sound from Stonington to Greenwich are now rising. Even though it is not low tide yet and the astronomical tide is still going out, everyone is now looking at the water levels begin to creep up. And I do think that will accelerate very quickly in the next couple hours. We are looking at a devastating storm surge. If you're not out yet, you need to leave. This is looking like a near worst case scenario surge for large portions of Long Island Sound, with storm surges that will bring water levels higher than they were in Irene, and in some cases much higher than what we saw in Irene. So now that we're pretty much past low tide, even though we still have about 45 minutes left, the water's rising everywhere. So here's what you need to know about high tide. High tide comes into Stonington and Groton at about 9:30, comes into the Old Saybrook, Guilford, Madison, Clinton area around 11, give or take a half hour depending on your exact location, and around midnight from East Haven all the way down to Greenwich. So with that in mind, through the next 6 or 7 hours, we will see the tides begin to rise very rapidly, and this will become a life-threatening and catastrophic storm surge event. So here's what we have in Bridgeport. The current tide level, 7.8 feet, is beginning to creep up. We're forecasting a level about a foot higher than Irene. In New London, the tide is coming in, and we also have storm surge picking up. Storm surge right now in New London is about 6 feet so far and still increasing. We're looking at a forecast that will bring the storm surge to within about a foot of what we saw during Hurricane Carol. And on top of the surge, we have very large waves, some 8 or 9 foot waves on exposed sections of the Sound that will be moving in, and those will cause damage to property. And if you want to head down to the water, do not do it. Don't try to look at this coming in, because one big wave and it could sweep you right out to sea. And unfortunately, we are looking at that scenario with very dangerous surge across all of Long Island Sound. Here we go in Stamford. We're looking at 8.3 feet right now. We still have hours to go before high tide, but the forecast in Stamford is for a 1.5 feet above what we had during Irene. In Stamford and Bridgeport, this would be the most serious coastal flooding since the Great New England Hurricane of 1938. So Jerry and Keisha, we're at about our lowest level for tides right now, but from here, we are going to increase tides quickly. It will be a sudden rise, it will be a dramatic rise, and it will be a life-threatening and catastrophic flood event across Long Island Sound. That's our biggest concern right now, because water has the potential to kill you if you are not smart. And if you were on the fence about whether or not to leave, get out now, because this is going to be really, really serious. We'll send it back to you.
Ryan, thank you.
Yeah, Jerry, Keisha, this is what we've been talking about, the storm surge. I am just 2 blocks from where you guys just took me live. What a completely different scene. Homes right now, the water's starting to come up right into the front of their houses. I just spoke with one of the homeowners who...
Quickly, so much flooding there, Diana said, in 30 minutes.
And Ryan, you know, obviously we're concentrating on the shoreline. You know, I assume everybody inland is going, hey, what about us? So, hey, what about them? And of course, knowing that the huge flooding issue is the shoreline.
Yeah, the huge coastal flooding issue is the shoreline, but now we're looking at the potential for the damaging winds to start spreading inland more so than they were before. Here's a look at live 3D Doppler radar, and you can see the center of Hurricane Sandy making landfall as a hurricane any minute now near Atlantic City. It's pulling off to the west. Behind it, though, we have very strong winds across the Atlantic Ocean, which are rotating toward Long Island toward Long Island Sound and toward us here in Connecticut. And actually, if I go back one more, I think I can get a close-up look. Here we go. You can see these little yellows and reds in here. These are little elements of convection is what we call it. When you have convection, you have these little areas inside one of these bands where you have very strong motion that's rising, and you get some very heavy rain in those. And also, as they pull through, you also have the potential to mix down some stronger winds. And that's what we're looking at now. In fact, one of those heavier bands right over Block Island, coming up toward Pawcatuck and Misquamicut and Westerly, heading into Stonington Borough before too long, where Diana was. And we'll see more of these rotating through over the next couple hours. So along the shoreline, the winds will pick up in New Haven and Bridgeport. Over the next 3 hours, they'll stay about where they were in New London, gusting at times to about 70 or 75 miles per hour from here on out. And again, the storm making landfall, but even though it's making landfall, we are not done with the worst yet here in Connecticut. A look at the wind gusts across Connecticut, 64 miles per hour in Bridgeport, 49 in New Haven, though your winds are going to pick up in the next hour or two. Groton, a 62 mile per hour wind gust. Take a look at Islip down there at 67. West Hampton Beach and Montauk, both without power, so we're not getting observations there. Notice in the Connecticut River Valley, the winds have been much less. In the Farmington Valley, we've seen wind gusts between 30 and 45 miles per hour. A few sporadic tree limbs down. But I do think as the winds, instead of being out of the northeast, when they shift to the southeast, which is underway right now, will bring up somewhat milder air from Long Island Sound, and we will begin to see some of the stronger winds that are right at about 1,000 feet mix down into the valley. So even though we haven't seen a whole lot north of Middletown along I-91, I think we'll begin to see more serious wind gusts over the next few hours. So that's something to keep in mind. In Hartford, up toward Enfield and Suffield, your strongest winds are still to come. Now here's a look at the winds in New London so far through the day today. Wind gusts about 40 miles per hour at 8 o'clock. 11 o'clock we were up to near 50, same at 2, and then a big spike, and that's where we are now, with winds gusting up to near hurricane force, 75 miles per hour. A slow tick down over the next several hours, but still very strong winds, enough to down trees and power lines. So we have at least 6 or 7 more hours to go of damaging winds across the state. So peak winds 60 to 75 miles per hour, many 75 or so mile per hour reports here in southern New London County. Once you get out into the Sound and toward Fisher's Island and Plum Island and some of the gulls out here, we're looking at wind gusts higher than that in Long Island Sound, above 80 miles per hour. But on land, 75 will do it along the shoreline, and that will begin to move into the greater New Haven area, at least 65 to 70 mile per hour winds over the next couple hours. And as I mentioned at the top of the weather segment here, Bridgeport with that impressive 64 mile per hour wind gust at Sikorsky Airport. So a 5 to 10-foot storm surge in Long Island Sound. The tides are rising now everywhere, so we're beginning to see the rise in the water, and that's going to continue all night long through midnight. And so we are looking at a devastating coastal flood event, the worst we've seen in many decades. So even if you didn't flood during Irene, it looks like unfortunately many areas will flood during Sandy, and this is going to be a big problem. So the water rise will be dramatic. It's not going to be slow. As the tide moves in, it will be a dramatic rise over the next few hours. So keep that in mind. Even though the tides have leveled out over the last couple hours, that's only because we're at low tide. And now from here, it's all up from here. Jerry and Keisha will send it back to you.
All right, Ryan, thank you very much.